from my perspective, when we do the work to understand our purpose, our unique gifts, how we fit into the quilt and the patchwork of our communities, our societies, what roles do we want to play? Not only is our life become a hell of a lot more fun, because we're actually living in doing the things that we were meant to do here. Life, at least for me, I can speak, the more that I did that work and got down to what my essence is, work is fun.
That was Charlie Hartwell, and you're listening to episode 177 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April and I'm your host. Hi, happy springtime. Holy cow. It has been an amazing, crazy upheaval the last couple of months. I don't know about you, but as things are starting to shift and change around me, I'm really finding that I'm doing a lot of reflection right now about what life was like before we all started social distancing or quarantining, and what life is looking like coming up and ahead. If you missed it, I want to make sure that you know about an episode that I put together a few weeks ago, because if you're feeling at all like I am, where, as things shift and change, you want to make sure that you're shifting and changing in an intentional way. If that feels like you or sounds like you, I want to make sure you know about episode 174. This episode came out on May 20th. And specifically, this is a hands-on episode that focused on using life design to think about what you want your life to look like post-COVID, and basically post-quarantine or shelter in place or whatever your state is calling it. Anytime things really shift around us, we have the opportunity to make decisions about whether we want to hold on to our old assumptions, our old habits, our old relationships, our old ways of doing things, and we can decide to enhance some of those things. We can decide to let some of those things go. And so the goal of that episode was to help you make those decisions from an intentional place, using your own personal values as a guidepost for which decisions are right for you. It's a really powerful episode, which is why I'm plugging it again to make sure that you know about it. Definitely check it out if this is something that you feel like you would be interested in. Additionally, I'm really excited about this week's episode. It's going to be an awesome one because we're diving into the mental health, mindfulness, self-help arena, but we're coming at it from a different perspective. This week, we are speaking with a man by the name of Charlie Hartwell. He is an investor of sorts. He invests in companies that are focused on things like mindfulness and mental health. And in fact, his organization was just named one of the organizations that has invested more in mental health startups than any venture capital firm on the planet. Even though he's not even a venture capital firm, he's put that much money into mental health and mindfulness related startups and applications. And these are not small companies. These are companies that you've heard of. These are companies like Happify. These are companies like Headspace. These are companies like Muse. We've spoken to two of the leaders of the company, Muse. I'll link up those 2 episodes down in the description if you want to make sure that you listen to those to see the types of companies that Charlie invests in. Now, this conversation is a really interesting one because not only do we get to talk to somebody about why so many of these companies are gaining so much market and why there's such a need for this type of service offering and these types of apps out there, making it a really great investment for him. So we're talking about that, but we're also talking about, he's the type of person who practices what he preaches. He basically is a life design practitioner. And we talk a lot about that and about how he has aligned the work that he is doing to his strengths and to what he really values and the things that he's really good at. And so that's an awesome conversation and another plug for the importance of life design. And finally, in this episode, we spend some time talking about the broader vision that Charlie has for the world. This guy's not in it for a small win. He wants to raise the consciousness of the world, as in globally, through the work that he's doing directly and through the companies that he invests in. That is such a huge goal, but it's amazing to think about it from the perspective of something so lofty guiding somebody's work, especially when his work has touched the lives. I think he said something like 100 million people have downloaded the applications of the startups that he has invested in. I mean, that is a huge impact. So I'm excited today to talk to Charlie in it for a number of reasons, because you're getting to see this industry from a different perspective. We don't usually get to see behind the curtain with, the funding mechanisms and the venture capital firms and, all of that's just side of business. We don't usually focus on that on the podcast. So that's interesting just in and of itself. But it's also really cool to hear from somebody who has applied all of this to his own life and somebody who's willing to share that with us in such a unique way. So I'm excited for you all to hear from Charlie Hartwell. This is such a great conversation, and I hope you take so much from it. Charlie, I'm so excited that you are on the show today because we're coming at some interesting topics from a different direction that I have ever covered on the show. So welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, April. I'm happy to be talking to you today. Thanks for having me on the show.
So this is so interesting because you basically invest in companies, many companies that people have probably heard of, especially if they listen to this show. We've actually spoken to some folks who own one of the companies you've invested in, but you invest in companies that focus on things like mindfulness and mental health and all of the things that we love to talk about on building psych strength. So can you give a little background of the work you do, the type of investments you make, maybe some of the companies that you've invested in, just to get people to know kind of, where you tend to focus with the work that you do?
Yeah, I think I'll just start by saying, one of my passions is to co-create global movements. And the latest one I find myself associated with is building a movement to more mental health, and investing in sort of consciousness and spirituality startups. So we have a group of investors 9 years ago asked themselves the question, had the science of contemplative practice gotten to a point where there would be entrepreneurs to take that science, build applications that could be globally scalable to both invest in and to help create impact in the world. And I got connected through them because my wife got me involved in the Mind and Life Institute, which had been involved in the science and in the space. And so I've been working in this space. We were early investors. I've been working for 9 years doing this work.
That's amazing. And one of the companies that you all have invested in is Muse. And we've actually spoken with a couple of the folks from Muse, most notably Ariel Ariel, who is, I believe she's CEO. Is that right?
No, she was the founder.
Founder,
she's
okay.
still on the board. Yes, Ariel. So we invested in what's called a bridge round before their Series A, and have been I've been on the board as an observer of that company for probably 7 years.
That's awesome. So it's interesting that you're focusing in the area of mental health, consciousness, mindfulness, all of these things, again, that we love to focus on here. You're making a financial investment, which means you believe as an investor and as a business person that there's a market for this and that there will be an ROI, meaning these companies will be fulfilling a need that people have. I'm curious if you could talk about a little bit about that, like the market for these types of things and why you believe that it's there and thriving now. Like, why is now a good time to be investing in this, in these types of companies?
Well, actually, 5 to 6 years ago was the time to invest in these companies. There's still some good investments in the space, but the reason why we've seen a great interest in this space is because really the science behind the applications is strong enough, and the reasons why people buy it there are multiple reasons, and there are also multiple addressable markets. So if you think of Headspace, which is one of our early investments, really that started out in the consumer space. We have other companies that actually started as what's called digital therapeutics. So take software and go through the FDA process and get approved by the FDA and then come into the healthcare system as a prescribed drug, but it's software versus a chemical drug. We've seen over the years, Fortune 500 companies are buying these for their employee wellness programs. And most now, I'd say maybe 70 to 80% Fortune 500 companies have mindfulness programs that they have, purchased and offered to their employees. Insurance companies are now providing these. Governments, education, just so many people are providing mindfulness and mental health solutions. And it's still early days in the market, but the uptake is significant. I would say on the platforms that we've invested in, we're probably approaching 100 million people that have downloaded the products and used them. And that, starting 9 years ago, there wasn't really any mindfulness apps. So it's there's significant interest, and for multiple reasons.
I'd love to dive in there a little bit further too, because you're talking about the science coming out and actually showing how useful and how much benefit there is to a mindfulness practice and to some of the other just mental health modalities that both an app can provide and through other ways that people can get these working for them in their lives. But there feels like there's this surge, not just in science in places that is only accessible to, say, other scientists. I sometimes joke that within the field of psychology, we have all of this amazing information and these amazing findings from research, but we write them in a way that no one can understand, and we publish them in places that no one will ever find. But I feel like that's changing. I mean, this podcast is a great example of it, and our, company is a great example of it. Like, we're trying to take that science and bring it to people in a way that not only can they understand it and that it's actually accessible, like they can actually get their hands on it, but in a way that they can understand that this actually applies to your day-to-day life. Like, this is actually something that can improve the life experience that you have if you put it to use in your life. And oh, by the way, here's a few ways that you can do that. So it is really cool that the science of mindfulness and related things is becoming more mainstream and just easier to get at. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, and I think underlying what you just described is this whole notion that a team can come together. The team, and Happify is one of our companies. It's a really good example. So it's a team of scientists. So they are very serious about sciences, about science. They have a chief science officer, very important component of their team. But then they have, engineers who actually take the applications of science and put it into a platform in a way that it's that people use it. And they actually, in their case, they actually do it in a way that you use it like in a prescribed format. So they don't want you on Happify all the time. They want you using Happify 10 minutes a day, 3 or 4 times a week for 8 weeks, for specific conditions. So they're programming it to be fun, enjoyable, having communities of support behind it, but they're pairing with scientists, they're pairing with, leading experts to make it digestible and to market it in such a way that, people want to engage.
I love that. It's interesting because not everyone, not every, say, governing body, I'm thinking of one in particular right now, but are really in support of the shift that we're talking about. So there are certain organizations that we run into within the field of psychology who are very deeply connected to the traditional way of delivering therapy. You go to somebody's office once a week, you sit on a couch, you talk it out face to face. Some of the stuff that we're doing, it's really frowned upon by some of these organizations. But at the same time, to your exact point, it's combining fields that have never been combined before, like thinking about psychology from the purpose of marketing a technique to people, like getting them to actually do this technique versus waiting until their life is in so much pain and struggle that they have no other choice but to come in. It's such a new approach that I just love, that we're helping people before they get to that point that they're struggling so hard. And we're doing it by making the experience something that's enjoyable, something that has less friction. It's the whole human-centered design process to create experiences and products that people will actually use because it's fulfilling a need that they have in their day-to-day life before a crisis happens. I just think it's so awesome. I'm curious about your overall general goal. Like you mentioned earlier on that you like to create global movements. I know that you've got this, goal of, focusing on consciousness, helping people. I think in your words, the word you used before we hopped on to record were to go deeper. Can you talk about sort of that more umbrella goal that you have, like sort of the reason for being or the reason for investing in these companies?
Well, my personal goal would be to help shift the consciousness of the planet.
Yeah, no big deal.
Small little thing. But actually, let me talk a little bit about going deeper. So we've been investors in this space, and as I understand it, somebody sent me a report a few weeks ago. They had surveyed 900 venture capital firms. We're not a venture capital firm, but we act like it sometimes. And we've made more investments in the mental health space than anyone else that they had surveyed. And but 2.5 years ago, my wife sat me down and said, "Charlie, you've been investing in the gateway drugs to higher levels of consciousness, and it's time to go deeper." And she said that because really what we had invested in was going to scale. But the question, so we had provided funding and support to entrepreneurs who were helping people to maybe sit for 10 minutes a day, learn a new practice, begin to meditate, and to begin, to learn how to deal with the stress that they were facing, or a little bit of the anxiety, to get them a little bit more aware of their thoughts, and to help them to be more aware of their breath, and just try to live a little bit more in the present moment. But going deeper is actually, our way of trying to encourage people and provide invitations to actually look at some of the things that causes them stress. So what is the stories and the conditioning, behind some of the stress? What are the behaviors that you can change? And how can we encourage you or support you to change those behaviors? How do we get beyond these conditions that we experience, if possible? And so we see some of the underlying causes of our mental health conditions versus just continuing to treat them. How do we help people to get more connected to their deeper self, their authentic self, their purpose? Why are they here on earth? How do we, then help to find communities of support so that they feel connected to people that they resonate with and really can have deeper and more authentic relationships? So for us, going deeper is sort of our next phase. Our next phase of the Bridge Builders Collaborative is to find and invest and support in companies that are doing that.
That's so amazing. It's amazing because something that I've talked with my business partner quite a bit about, and actually talked with my husband quite a bit about. He's an ER physician, my husband is. And I've talked about how psychology for a long time has operated on the emergency department model. I kind of mentioned it before, but we wait until you are in so much pain that you finally pick up the phone and call a therapist. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've been to therapy in my life for, situations that I have been greatly improved by, speaking to another person and going through that type of treatment. But, man, that's only a small percentage of what the field can do. And it's as though if our healthcare system shut everything down and we only had emergency departments and we waited until you were so sick that you absolutely couldn't function anymore, and then you rush in and see my husband. But it's as though you had no idea, basically without all of the work that you're doing, the analogy would be if you had no idea what a healthy food was, if you had no idea that gummy bears were less healthy than eating a banana, if you had no idea that exercise would make your body healthier, no clue. Largely, people don't know what a good quote unquote diet for their mind is and what quote unquote exercise they should be doing to cultivate, this what we call psychological strength. Because this is all the preventative and the sort of maintenance work that you can do to maybe not necessarily 100% keep yourself from ending up in a situation where you might have a diagnosis or need to see a therapist, but certainly reduce the likelihood or reduce the struggle if you do find yourself in that situation. So I think it's cool that you are in this same space where, you're trying to help people who, aren't necessarily in crisis yet. They just want to live a better life.
So April, one of the statistics that I just found amazing that science seems to have, shown to be pretty evident, and I may be off by plus or minus, 5 percentage points, but I'm not that far off. But 70% of doctors' visits the underlying cause is stress. So if you look at the conditions that people end up with when they have repeated stress for multiple years and they're anxious, they're feeling depressed and they're not getting support, and they're not, that just manifests over the time, over a period of time. And so if we can help to support people to be able to better handle the underlying stresses of our crazy world, then we think that people not only will be healthier and happier, but also, we can help it so you don't need to go to the ER doctor, so that you're, seeing your physician, for checkups more often than for emergencies.
Absolutely. It's interesting because in in my former life, I was a data scientist in the healthcare industry. Specifically, a lot of that I worked for insurance companies. And one of the things that we would look at is research about what are called modifiable health factors. So the health factors that we have control over behaviorally that drive most of our healthcare cost. And it's something like 70% of the cost in our healthcare system can be linked to 10 modifiable behavioral factors. One of them is mental health. And it's incredible when you look at some of the work that I would do was to look at the difference in, say, an average cost for a patient who has name your chronic condition. It doesn't matter. All of them operate this way. If the person either does or does not have a comorbid mental health diagnosis, and the cost is typically about double for a person who has a mental health diagnosis as well. It's so important and interconnected that we take care of our mind and that we focus on it and give it as much attention and, give it as much work as we do with our physical body, because it's all interconnected. And I don't think people realize the degree to which their physical health is impacted by that. And two, their financial situation is impacted by, their mental health. I'm also curious about something that you said earlier around sort of almost the spiritual nature of this, because I've been reading a number of authors lately who, if you boil down their message, it's basically taking this approach to spirituality where it's almost psychology is at the center of it. It's spirituality from the sense of getting to know yourself and your place in the broader, say, globe, universe, nature, all of it, how you are situated within all of that, and the role that our, and I'll say consciousness or awareness plays in either allowing us to see that place and how we fit in and how interconnected we are, versus the role that it can sometimes play by masking how connected we are with everything else around us, nature, everything else. I'm curious if that at all aligns with some of your broader goals, or the way that you think about going deeper, or the way that you think about, you mentioned like raising the consciousness of, the world, which is, again, your tiny goal.
Well, I resonate with a lot of what you just said. And from my perspective, when we do the work to understand our purpose, our unique gifts, how we fit into the quilt and the patchwork of our communities, our societies, what roles do we want to play? Not only is our life become a hell of a lot more fun, because we're actually living in doing the things that we were meant to do here. Life, at least for me, I can speak, the more that I did that work and got down to what my essence is, work is fun. It's enjoyable. I love what I do because I'm right in my sweet spot for what I'm doing, because I really understand what my role is, and I don't do what I used to do, which is try to go outside of that to prove something. If I'm not good at it, why should I be doing it? And I used to try to spend a lot of time proving that I could be good at things that I'm actually not good at. So knowing my own strengths and my gifts and my purpose is, it just creates for me a healthier, happier, more abundant life.
That's amazing. It's what you're hitting on is something that we talk a lot about within, our programs and our content. We like to combine the field of psychology with something that we call life design. It's basically taking the human-centered design process and applying it to people and their lives. And you're hitting right on that. The first step of that, it's like designing a product or designing one of the apps that you would invest in. You get to know the people who are going to use the app. What are their goals and what are their barriers and what problems are you solving for them? Both the obvious ones and then the sort of secondary and tertiary ones that are a little bit deeper. You get to know them really well and then you design for them. And in the same way, exactly as you've described, if you can get to know yourself, your values, your strengths, your weaknesses, be honest about them, what you look like at your best, how you want your day to look, all of those things, if you can get to know those things deeply and the interconnections among them. I mean, think about just the interconnections between your unique value system as a person and what you're good at, your strengths. There's huge power in knowing that. Getting to know yourself at that level and then designing your life, meaning what type of job should you have? What relationships are the right ones for you? How should your days look to align to all of that? Things change rapidly and meaningfully for people when all of a sudden, as you said, you're working within alignment and that sweet spot that you uniquely belong in. It's just phenomenal, the feedback we get from people when they're finally sort of jiving with the person that they actually are. It's amazing.
I agree with you. And one thing that I'd add to that, and again, from my own experience, is when you go through all of that, there's a question of alignment of like, what do you need to let go of? I was someone, who had an incredible amount of relationships that I held on to all my life. And I was conditioned to think that is what we're supposed to do. If you begin to sort of say, as you grow personally, what are the relationships that no longer suit you? And how do you, gently just, let that go? Because in order to fill new space, because you've changed, you need to let go of things to be able to fill that space. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people is what is getting in the way of you going to where your sweet spot is, and letting go of some of the old can be hard for people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it gets into that. This is the devil I know, or this is what is, I don't want to say comfortable, because in a lot of cases it doesn't feel good, but this is what's familiar to me. And we worry so much about what will it mean if we let that go? Will I be losing something? Will I not be able to get it back if I need it? But you don't realize I don't know whose quote that is. Anytime you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to other things.
Yes, yep.
And your exact point, you've got this, this finite vessel of time and energy that you can use, and just cognitive ability that you can use in any given day. And you have to make room for it. And it can be so painful to do that. I'm wondering if you're willing to share, you don't have to get incredibly personal with naming the person or whatever, but how did that work for you? How did you navigate that and make those changes in your life? What were things that you had to let go of in order to really nestle into the place that you are now? It sounds like where you're squarely in that sweet spot for yourself.
So you live in Minnesota, and I'm from 5 generations of Minnesotans. So looking at some of the patterns within my own family system that had been ingrained for generations, and how I'd been conditioned to act in my own family system. There was a lot of bullying. There was a lot of pretense. There was a lot of sort of passive aggressive behavior. I had been sort of the good little boy in the family, sort of holding it all together. I had to take a look at my role in that family system, and part of that was my own enabling of that system through being a caretaker, and then look at those patterns, and then decide to change those patterns. And the reaction, to the family system when you do that can be pretty severe. It can be an adjustment. In my family system, it was a massive adjustment, and people were not happy with it. But I was really clear that I was not going to play the role or interact with the behavior anymore the way that I had for many years. So letting go of that was challenging. And at the same time, it was incredibly freeing.
I can imagine. And I think that highlights, too, going back to something you said earlier around one of the goals of the companies that you invest in are to create this community of people who are doing this work or who are on this path. Because when you do, I don't want to use like a really harsh word like sever, but like when you do distance a bit from people who might not be in that same place, you still need that connection and you still need a system around you, but you want it to be one that's supporting the direction you're going. And so being able to connect with other people through some of these apps and through the communities that they build, it just helps you. I think it helps you create that distance a little bit because it doesn't feel as scary. It doesn't feel like you're wandering out there, exposed and by yourself. You're within a group and within a community of people who are doing the same work. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And I will just say that, there are different areas that we're looking to invest in as we consider going deeper. And one of them is in the social wellness area. And I think you'll resonate with this given our conversation. The research indicates that, that social isolation or loneliness is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day from a health perspective. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things that we're looking at investing in is how do we help to create, promote, provide invitations to authentic communities of support, as you're describing, that can either be online or online and offline. And then how as well we have one company called Fabric, Fabriq, which is in Denver, and they're really providing this tool to be able to make your relationships much more intentional. So you choose who you want to be in your inner circle, and you can bring people in and out depending on what your intention is. But then you set intentions about how often do I want to connect with that person. And for me, it's been a fantastic tool of just saying, I have this intentionality around this person. I've defined them as being really important, and I no longer let that go for months at a time and sort of think, well, I just haven't talked to him lately. It's like, it tells me, if I want to speak to them every month, I can see when the time is to connect, again, because of my intention. And I feel closer to those people because I've actually said you are important, and then I'm taking more action to support that connection.
That's amazing. That's actually something I talked about in a previous episode. I spoke with a man named Peter Montoya. He is an expert in the realm of social connection. He talks about a lot of research around how much direct social connection we need in a day versus the tiny amount that we actually get. It's actually really shocking. But we talked a lot. He's been on the podcast twice, and it's his first episode that we had this conversation around what it looks like to have intentional social connection. And to some people, it can feel fabricated. If you're sitting here with your list of friends who you're going to reach out to, but if you don't do that, if you don't take the time to really think about who those people are that you want to play a central role in your life, how often you do want to connect with them, and what you want to make sure that you're doing to deepen that relationship. If you don't intentionally sit down and do that, it's not going to happen. And it's likely to happen in a direction that, if you just sort of involuntarily let things go or passively let things go, they rarely go in the direction that you want them to go or to the depth that you want them to go. And so we talked a lot about this intentional nature of pick the 5 people you want to have the deepest, say, intimate connection with. Pick the 5 people that you want to have a really deep business connection with. Like, who are those people that you're really going to invest in? Because to your earlier point, right, you only have a certain amount of bandwidth to be able to do it. And the people who are going to sort of randomly show up in your inbox probably aren't going to be those 5 people all of the time. Like, you have to work at that. I love that. That's so good. That's so good. If you could say give advice at this point, like to this audience who, I mean, it's an audience of people who are like jiving with you. I mean, they're right there with you that mindfulness is important, social connection is important, mental health is important, building our own psychological strength is important. If you could give sort of advice to an audience who's like nodding along with you, like, yes, to sort of go deeper for themselves, something that they can do from this episode to take this to the next level in their own life, like what would your advice be to them?
So it's something that maybe that my wife actually taught me a long time ago, which is instead of setting goals for yourself, etc., set intentions and kind of the way that she described it, and I began to understand that that's like your prayer. Your prayers are your intentions, and if you set those intentions of what resonates with you, what resonates with your heart at a deeper level, etc., then if you set those intentions, how do you just sort of watch those unfold or look for things that happen in your life that leads you in that direction? Because I believe that we're supported by, forces greater than ourselves. And that, those forces, listen to us and what is in our heart's desire. So that might be one thing that I'd suggest.
That's amazing. Set intentions, not goals. That is not something that we do very often. So I love that as advice. What does it mean to you? I mean, you've got this depth of working with so many companies that, you've named them and we've all heard of all of them. What does psychological strength mean to you? What does it mean to be psychologically strong from the background that you've had with so many of these companies that are working in this space?
Yeah, I don't know if my definition might be different. To be so if I'm connected to my essence, to who I am and what I'm doing, and I live a life of integrity and don't deviate, from who I am and show up in the world that way, my sense is I'll be very psychologically strong.
I love that. That's such a huge piece of it. Self-awareness and being so honest with yourself about, that, as you said, that true essence of who you are is so critical. I love that. This has been amazing. It has been so incredible to get to know you and the deeper meaning and deeper goals behind the work that you're doing. Sometimes you hear, like investors, and it seems like such a stark kind of sterile, set of work to do, but you have such a deep meaning behind why you're making each of these investments. This has been awesome. If people want to learn more about you, learn more about the companies that you're investing in, learn more about this movement to really change the consciousness of the whole planet, which I adore. If they want to learn more about that, where can we find you?
So my wife and I have a business called the ShiftIt Institute, which is shiftit.com. Our mission is to ignite consciousness, inspire human potential, and create paradigm shifts. The work that I do in investing, which is the vast majority of my work, is through Bridge Builders Collaborative, and you can find out about that at bbcollaborative.com. I'm also, on LinkedIn. I have a Medium blog. Just go to ShiftIt Institute or Charlie Hartwell, and you'll find me there. That's probably the best ways.
I love it. This has been wonderful. Just getting to know, as I said at the top of this episode, a side of the industry that not a lot of us get a good glimpse into, but also a glimpse into, the decision making behind why somebody would be in this space and the importance of it. So I can't thank you enough for being here, for sharing your story, and for sharing all of this wisdom with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, April.
It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.